For the majority of Americans in the 1920s, national parks existed only in postcards, too far from home to visit. And so, when the federal government began to explore the idea of a new park in the eastern U.S., Virginia leaders prepared their pitch. The perfect location was just 75 miles from Washington in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The wild Appalachian landscape was stunning, filled with flora and fauna, and within a day's drive for 40 million Americans. A national park near the nation's capital became a catchy slogan, but it also promised to bring a windfall of tourism revenue. I consider this to be the greatest opportunity for the material advancement of Virginia that has been suggested for generations, said future Governor Harry Byrd in 1925. Promoters, led by resort owner George Freeman Pollock, worked to sell federal officials on the Blue Ridge site. And in May of 1926, President Coolidge signed a bill authorizing the creation of Shenandoah National Park, if Virginia would gift the land to the federal government. State officials and business leaders were ecstatic. But in all the excitement, one truth seemed to get overshadowed. Shenandoah wasn't really the near wilderness that Pollock and others had claimed. It was home to hundreds of families, many of whom had lived in the mountains for generations. There, they had built close-knit communities and livelihoods tied to the land. And many were less than eager to leave, especially to make room for a park billed as a playground for Washingtonians and out-of-state visitors. As one landowner wrote in an appeal to the White House, "We are unwilling to part with our homes to help a small part of our population to get their hands into tourist pockets." But Virginia officials led by William Carson pressed on. As the Great Depression set in, the state surveyed thousands of properties in order to condemn them by eminent domain and turn the land over to the federal government. Meanwhile, construction began on Skyline Drive, trails, and other projects that would transform the mountains into a park. Those who felt uneasy about evicting families were soon given reasons to think differently. In the late 1920s, a young school teacher named Miriam Sizer was hired to study 5 communities near Old Rag Mountain. In letters, she described the residents as a struggling, primitive people who needed the government's helping hand. Newspapers seized on the narrative with startling headlines about life in the porous Blue Ridge hollows. Then sociologist Mandel Sherman and reporter Thomas Henry followed up with a study called Hollow Folk, which cast the most remote communities as degenerate. The accounts cemented stereotypes that mountain people were backwards, ignorant, and cut off from American life. Many residents chafed at the inaccurate portrayals. But for park boosters, they helped justify the project. Relocating residents wasn't just good for the park, organizers argued. It would be good for the people, too. As Interior Secretary Ray Lyman Wilbur said of one community in 1932, "They will be better off. They have nothing to lose." Several landowners challenged the process in court. But in the end, most accepted the payouts offered by the state for their land, about $13 an acre on average. Some families were eventually resettled on government homestead farms. But at least 11 displaced residents were institutionalized, and some of them forcibly sterilized under Virginia's eugenics program. It was a chilling outcome, rooted in the same pseudoscience which cast remote mountain people as deficient. A few stalwarts, including 62-year-old Melanchthon Kleiser, continued to hold out on their land until they were removed by force. On October 3, 1935, Kleiser was handcuffed in front of the store he operated near the town of Luray. As his house was boarded up and his belongings were set out by the road, he sang the Star-Spangled Banner. 2 months later, the federal government accepted the transfer of over 170,000 acres of land from Virginia. Most traces of the old mountain communities were soon destroyed. On July 3, 1936, President Franklin D. Roosevelt dedicated Shenandoah National Park. Before a crowd of thousands, he called it a work of conservation, which would benefit future generations. In many ways, that turned out to be true. Shenandoah has been enjoyed by millions of Americans for decades. But for some Virginia families, the legacy of the park is not what was preserved, but instead, all that was lost. For more DC area history, check out our Boundary Stones playlist, and subscribe to WETA PBS on YouTube.